Okay, moving on into 13b, now that we've detected certain odor molecules, how are we actually going to process and perceive that information? So where do we go in the brain? So firstly, olfaction is weird and unique in that it is the only sense that does not go to the thalamus first before going to other parts of the brain. So everything else, our somatosensory, so touch, pain, temperature, right, through the brainstem and then into the thalamus before it went out to the cerebral cortex. Vision, hearing, they all went to the thalamus, vestibular sense, before they went to the cerebral cortex. So olfaction is unique in that it doesn't. So if you think about the thalamus, you're like, wait, isn't that our triage center that determines what we should pay attention to and what we shouldn't? And so then how do we not get overwhelmed by all of the smells in our environment? Good question. The answer is that we have the ability to do what's called olfactory adaptation, also called odor habituation. So when you first walk into a Domino's or Lucette or whatever type of pizza place it may be, you are just inundated with the smells of the pizza. But after you spend an amount of time in there, it becomes less noticeable to you. And that's because the olfactory receptor neurons themselves have a little negative feedback in mechanism inside of them, so that they, with continued exposure to a particular odorant, they fire less frequently. So they become less responsive to an odor with continued or prolonged exposure. There is also some data to suggest that parts of the brain may also downregulate and become less responsive with continued exposure. But so that's kind of neat. It's our only sense for which we don't rely on the thalamus to kind of regulate how much of it is actually coming in. It does a little bit of that itself. Okay, so it's unique in that it's the only sense that goes to parts of the cerebral cortex without starting in the thalamus. And then the other way in which it's unique is that I think the pathways are not entirely clear. So Lim gives us some slightly different information from the Hedges textbook, so I went looking at a whole bunch of other sources. So this is what Hedges textbook tells us, so from the olfactory bulb, you either go to the tubercle, which then goes to the thalamus and the orbital frontal cortex, or you go to this olfactory cortex and related structures. This was a diagram from a study published in a ear, nose, and throat journal. So I found lots of different conflicting information about exactly which way the pathway goes and in which directions and which sequences. So suffice it to say, olfaction goes to many different brain areas. So we're going to pay less attention to the order in which it goes and just acknowledge that it goes to many different parts of the brain, many of them directly without starting at the thalamus first, many of which are not involved in conscious perception of odors, but will respond anyway, and that these different parts of the brain also talk to each other. So we have this direct access to many areas without going through the thalamus, which is going to have both conscious and unconscious effects. So there's a few brain regions that I want you to know about, and it's kind of our first introduction to some of these. We're going to talk about them more later in the course. So the first is the hippocampus. So we can see in this diagram on the left, the hippocampus is shown here in this yellow. And it's this structure that is found kind of deep within the temporal lobe. The folks who first studied it thought that it looks like a seahorse. So you can see in the photograph here, they've dissected out the hippocampus, and then they've got a seahorse next to it. Okay. And what we know is that the hippocampus is really important for memory and for learning. So you can think of the hippocampus as your place to remember things. And so the sense of smell is actually deeply tied in with many of our odors. To this day, if I smell a menthol cigarette, I think of my grandmother. So there she is on the left, right? So we have these really strong memories tied to odors. If you've seen the movie Ratatouille, the other image is a scene from that movie where the smell and taste, we'll come back to that, of a particular dish, ratatouille, actually takes the food critic back to his childhood, right? So we have very strong ties between memories and odors. Another place that olfactory information goes is to the amygdala. So here's the hippocampus here, and then right near it is the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is also located in the temporal lobe. You can see that here, and it's important for processing of emotions. And so because of that, odors can have a strong emotional impact. And this is where a lot of the ideas behind aromatherapy, for example, comes into play. The data on that is relatively weak, I will say. I took a look to see what evidence we had out there. It's not negligible, it's not zero, but odors can definitely influence our emotions. So that's kind of neat and kind of fun to see. Odors also go to the reticular formation, which is in the brainstem, which is down here, and is part of the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system is what regulates our alertness. Are we wide awake and on high alert? Are we drowsy? So depending on what you want, right, either one of those can be good or bad depending on the situation. Now, it makes sense that odors, which could signal danger, might then have this direct input to kind of signal and put us on alert, like, oh, look out, there's danger approaching, right? Or there's smoke, where's there fire? You might need to run, all those types of things. So reticular activating system, in terms of the reticular formation, also receives olfactory information. As you can see, it also is receiving visual information. Makes sense. And then finally, the orbitofrontal cortex. So this is part of the frontal lobe, and it's the part that's right behind the eyes. And the limb textbook does talk about this. And it receives olfactory information that has been filtered through the thalamus, as well as some information from some other areas of the brain. So we are pretty sure that this is the part that is involved in conscious perception and identification of odors and flavors, as we'll talk about a little bit later. So this is, part of our higher functioning, right, from the telencephalon. This is higher brain order stuff. So in summary, many of our olfactory signals go directly to the brain, directly to areas of the cerebral cortex without going to the thalamus first, right? They may go through the brainstem, but they don't go through the thalamus first. And so the olfactory receptor neurons themselves can downregulate that olfactory adaptation, where after you've been smelling something for a while, you don't really notice it so much anymore. You become kind of habituated to it. And then the fact that olfaction goes to lots of different places of the brain, and they all interconnect and talk to each other. So some important regions to know are the hippocampus, which is involved in memory and learning, the amygdala, which is involved in regulation of emotions, the reticular activating system, which regulates our levels of alertness, and that orbitofrontal cortex, which we're pretty sure is the part of our brain that becomes consciously aware of and identifies different odors. All right, so in the next part, we will talk about disorders of olfaction. See you there.